Sarah Martinez had always been smaller than most people expected a Navy SEAL to be. At 5 feet 4 inches tall, with a lean build that spoke of endurance rather than brute strength, she often found herself having to prove her credentials in ways her male counterparts never did. But, after 12 years of service, including 3 deployments to Afghanistan and 2 to Iraq, she had learned to let her actions speak louder than her appearance. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning at the Veterans Affairs office in San Diego. Sarah had arrived early for her appointment, hoping to expedite her disability claim process. The waiting room buzzed with the familiar mix of veterans from different eras and branches, each carrying their own invisible burdens from service. She wore her Navy SEAL Foundation t-shirt, a simple black cotton shirt with the distinctive Trident logo embroidered on the left chest. It was one of her favorites, comfortable and well-worn from years of casual wear. She had paired it with jeans and sneakers, her long dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Nothing about her appearance screamed military bearing, which had always been intentional. After years of hypervigilance overseas, blending into civilian life had become second nature. The man sitting across from her kept staring. He was older, maybe in his 60s, wearing a Vietnam veteran's cap and a jacket covered in military patches. His eyes kept flicking from her shirt to her face with obvious skepticism. Sarah tried to ignore him, focusing instead on the paperwork in her lap, but his muttering grew louder. "Stolen valor," she heard him whisper to his wife. "These kids today, no respect." Sarah's jaw tightened, but she kept her eyes on her forms. She had dealt with this before. The assumption that someone who looked like her could not possibly have earned the right to wear that shirt. The presumption that she was somehow dishonoring the memory of fallen teammates by existing in a space traditionally occupied by men. "Excuse me, miss," the man called out loudly enough for half the waiting room to hear. "Where did you get that shirt?" Sarah looked up slowly, her dark eyes meeting his with the steady gaze she had perfected during interrogation resistance training. "I earned it." "Earned it how?" His voice carried the challenge she had heard countless times before. "You some kind of SEAL groupie? Buy that at the Navy Exchange gift shop?" The waiting room had gone quiet now, other veterans turning to watch the confrontation unfold. Sarah felt the familiar weight of having to defend herself, to prove her worth to men who had never had their credentials questioned based on their appearance alone. "I served with SEAL Team 5, she said calmly, her voice carrying just enough authority to make him pause. 12 years active duty." The man snorted. "Right. And I'm the Easter Bunny. SEALs don't look like soccer moms." That stung more than Sarah cared to admit. She had given everything to her country, lost friends in combat, carried physical and mental scars that would never fully heal. And, yet, sitting in a VA office surrounded by fellow veterans, she was being accused of fraud simply because she did not fit someone's narrow idea of what a warrior should look like. "Sir, I don't want any trouble," Sarah said, standing up slowly. At her full height, she was still shorter than most of the men in the room, but something in her posture commanded respect. "I'm just here for my appointment like everyone else." "Stolen valor is a federal crime," the man continued, his voice rising. "I've seen plenty of fakes in my day, and you're not fooling anyone." Other veterans were starting to take sides now. A few nodded in agreement with the older man, their own experiences making them protective of military honors. Others seemed uncomfortable with the confrontation, shifting in their seats and avoiding eye contact. Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out her military ID, the one that identified her as a retired petty officer first class. "Here's my ID if you want to see it." The man barely glanced at it. Anyone can fake those these days. Probably ordered it online. The situation was escalating beyond anything Sarah had expected when she woke up that morning. She could feel her heart rate increasing, not from fear but from the familiar frustration of having to fight for respect she had already earned with blood, sweat, and sacrifice. "Look," she said, trying one more time to defuse the situation. "I understand your concern about stolen valor. It's a real problem, and it dishonors people like us who actually served. But I'm not lying about my service." "Prove it," the man demanded. "Real SEALs have stories. Real SEALs have scars. What's your BUD/S class number? What was your instructor's name? Where did you serve?" The questions came rapid fire, each one designed to trip her up, to catch her in a lie that would vindicate his suspicions. Sarah answered them all calmly and accurately, but she could see that nothing she said would convince him. His mind was made up based on her appearance, and no amount of facts would change that. Bud/S Class 234, she replied without hesitation. Instructor Petty Officer Collins. Served primarily in Afghanistan, Helmand Province, and Iraq, Al-Anbar. 3 Bronze Stars, Purple Heart, Combat Action Ribbon. The man waved her words away dismissively. Anyone can look that stuff up online. I'm calling security. Sarah felt her stomach drop. Being detained for stolen valor would be more than just embarrassing. It could affect her disability claim, her reputation in the veteran community, and her future employment prospects. The accusation alone would follow her, regardless of whether it was proven false. Sir, please don't do this, she said, but the man was already walking toward the security desk at the front of the office. She watched him gesture animatedly as he spoke to the guard, pointing back at her repeatedly. The security officer, a young man who looked like he might be prior military himself, listened with a serious expression before walking over to where Sarah stood. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with me, he said politely but firmly. We've received a complaint about possible stolen valor. Sarah nodded slowly, gathering her papers and following him toward a small office near the back of the building. She could feel the eyes of every person in the waiting room following her, some sympathetic, others judgmental. The walk felt endless, each step echoing in the suddenly silent space. The office was small and sterile, with government-issued furniture and fluorescent lighting that cast harsh shadows on everything. The security officer, whose nameplate read Johnson, gestured for her to take a seat while he settled behind the desk. Ma'am, I need to ask you some questions about your military service, he began, pulling out a form. The gentleman who made the complaint says you're impersonating a Navy SEAL. I'm not impersonating anyone, Sarah said firmly. I am a Navy SEAL. Retired, but the training and the brotherhood don't retire. Johnson studied her for a moment, and she could see him trying to reconcile her appearance with his own preconceptions about Special Operations Forces. It was a look she had grown tired of seeing, the subtle doubt that crept into people's eyes when they tried to square her reality with their expectations. Can you provide documentation of your service? He asked. Sarah handed over her military ID, her VA card, and her retirement paperwork. Johnson examined each document carefully, comparing the photos to her face and checking the official seals and watermarks. Everything was legitimate, but she could see that he was still uncertain. These look real, he admitted, but the gentleman outside seems pretty convinced that you're not who you say you are. He's got 30 years of military experience himself. 30 years of experience that apparently didn't teach him that women can serve in special operations, Sarah replied, unable to keep the edge out of her voice entirely. Johnson shifted uncomfortably. Ma'am, I'm not trying to question your service, but you have to understand that stolen valor is a serious issue. We get cases here pretty regularly, and some people go to great lengths to fake their credentials. Sarah nodded. I understand that, and I respect your need to verify. But I'm telling you the truth. I served my country for 12 years, and I earned every decoration and qualification on my record. Can you tell me about your BUD/S training? Johnson asked, consulting a list of questions that someone had obviously prepared for situations like this. Sarah took a deep breath and began to describe the most challenging 6 months of her life. She talked about Hell Week, the endless runs on the beach, the log carries, the boat races, and the instructors who seemed determined to break every candidate who showed up at Coronado. She described the feeling of nearly drowning during pool competency training, the cold that seeped into her bones during surf torture, and the moment she realized she would rather die than quit. Johnson listened intently, occasionally asking follow-up questions that demonstrated his own military background. As Sarah spoke, she could see his doubt beginning to waver. The details she provided were too specific, too personal, too visceral to have been memorized from a website or a book. What about deployments? He asked. Where did you serve overseas? My first deployment was to Afghanistan in 2010, Sarah began, her voice taking on a different quality as she recalled memories that still haunted her dreams. We were based out of Kandahar, but we operated primarily in Helmand Province. The Taliban had a strong presence there, and our job was to disrupt their supply lines and eliminate high-value targets. She described missions that most people could never imagine, operations conducted under cover of darkness in hostile territory where a single mistake could mean death for her and her teammates. She spoke of the brotherhood forged in combat, the trust that developed when your life depended entirely on the person next to you. On my second deployment to Iraq, we were tasked with training Iraqi special forces, she continued. It was different from Afghanistan. The urban environment presented unique challenges, and working with local forces required a different skill set than direct action missions. Johnson was taking notes now, his earlier skepticism replaced by what appeared to be genuine interest in her story. But Sarah could tell that he was still uncertain about what to do with her. The documents seemed real, her knowledge appeared authentic, but the complaint from a respected veteran carried weight in a community that took pride in protecting its honor. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to make some phone calls to verify your story," Johnson finally said. "It might take a while." Sarah nodded, settling back in her chair for what she knew would be a long wait. Outside the office, she could hear the normal sounds of the VA facility continuing its daily operations, veterans coming and going, appointments being kept, lives being slowly rebuilt after service. She thought about her teammates, the men and women who had accepted her not because of her gender but because of her abilities and her commitment to the mission. They had never questioned whether she belonged, never made her feel like she had to prove herself based on anything other than her performance. The irony was not lost on her that she was being questioned about her service in a place specifically designed to serve veterans. The VA office was supposed to be a safe space, a place where those who had sacrificed for their country could receive the support and recognition they had earned. Instead, she found herself having to defend her very identity to people who should have understood better than anyone the diverse faces of American military service. As the minutes ticked by, Sarah reflected on the path that had brought her to this moment. Growing up in a military family, she had always known she wanted to serve, but the idea of becoming a SEAL had seemed impossible for a girl from a small town in New Mexico. The Navy had only recently opened special operations roles to women when she decided to try out, and the road had been far from easy. She remembered the doubt in her recruiter's eyes when she first expressed interest in special operations. The assumption that she would wash out during the first week of training. The constant feeling that she had to be twice as good as her male counterparts just to be considered equal. But she had persevered, driven by a determination that surprised even herself. When other candidates dropped out during Hell Week, she pushed through. When instructors tried to break her spirit, she found reserves of strength she did not know she possessed. When her body screamed for rest, she kept moving forward because quitting was not an option. The training had been brutal, but it had also been transformative. She learned that her physical limitations could be overcome through mental toughness and technical skill. She discovered that leadership came not from size or volume, but from competence and integrity. She found her place in a brotherhood that valued excellence above all else. Johnson's voice interrupted her thoughts as he returned to the office after what felt like hours but had probably only been 30 minutes. His expression was difficult to read, professional but somehow different than when he had left. "Ma'am, I've made several calls to verify your story," he said, settling back behind his desk. "Your service record checks out through the normal channels. Everything you've told me appears to be accurate." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her, but Johnson's tone suggested that the situation was not entirely resolved. "However," he continued, "the gentleman who made the complaint is insisting that we bring in additional verification. He's contacted some of his veteran friends, and they're putting pressure on my supervisor to escalate this matter." The relief Sarah had felt moments earlier evaporated. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means that despite the documentation and your answers to our questions, we're going to have to involve military police," Johnson said apologetically. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I believe you're telling the truth, but I don't have the authority to close this case on my own." Sarah felt her world shifting beneath her feet. Military police involvement would mean official charges, investigations, and, potentially, criminal proceedings. Even if she was eventually vindicated, the process would be humiliating and could have lasting consequences for her civilian life. "How long will that take?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Hard to say. Could be a few hours, could be longer. They'll want to do their own investigation, contact your former commanding officers, verify your story through official channels." Sarah nodded slowly, processing the reality of her situation. She was about to be formally accused of a federal crime, not because of any evidence against her, but because she did not look the part of what some people expected a Navy SEAL to be. "Can I call someone?" she asked. "A lawyer, or maybe someone from my old unit?" "Of course," Johnson said. "You have the right to representation, and you can make phone calls as needed." As Sarah reached for her phone, she wondered who she could call who would actually be able to help her in this situation. most of her former teammates had moved on with their lives, scattered across the country in various civilian careers. Her old commanding officers might not even remember her specifically, and it could take days to reach them through official channels. She scrolled through her contacts, looking for anyone, who might be able to vouch for her service quickly enough to resolve this nightmare before it spiraled completely out of control. The clock on the office wall seemed to tick louder with each passing second, marking time until the military police arrived to formally detain her. Outside the office, she could hear normal life continuing at the VA facility. Veterans receiving the services they had earned, families getting the support they needed, people moving forward with their lives after military service. She wondered if any of them had ever found themselves in a situation like this, having to prove their worth to their own community simply because they did not fit the expected mold. The weight of everything she had sacrificed for her country seemed to press down on her shoulders as she sat in that sterile office, waiting for authorities to arrive and formally question her right to wear a shirt that represented the proudest accomplishment of her life. The military police arrived exactly 43 minutes after Johnson made his call. Sarah watched through the small office window as two MPs in crisp uniforms entered the VA facility, their presence immediately changing the atmosphere in the waiting room. Conversation stopped, and veterans who had been casually chatting suddenly sat straighter, their military bearing automatically returning as if they were back on base. Staff Sergeant Monica Rivera was the senior MP, a woman in her early 30s with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to handling difficult situations. Her partner, Corporal James Peterson, looked younger but carried himself with the serious demeanor that military police training instilled in all its graduates. Both wore their authority like a second skin, professional and uncompromising. Johnson escorted them to his office, where Sarah had been waiting with a mixture of anxiety and resignation. She had spent the time trying to reach former teammates, but most of her calls had gone to voicemail. The few people she had managed to contact were scattered across different time zones, making immediate verification difficult. "Ms. Martinez, I'm Staff Sergeant Rivera," the senior MP introduced herself formally. "We're here to investigate a complaint of stolen valor filed against you. You have the right to remain silent, and anything you say can be used against you in a court of law." The Miranda rights felt surreal in this context. Sarah had never imagined that her military service would one day be treated as potential criminal activity. She nodded her understanding and confirmed that she wanted to proceed without an attorney present, confident that the truth would eventually vindicate her. "Let's start from the beginning," Rivera said, opening a digital tablet to record their conversation. "Can you state your full name and social security number for the record?" "Sarah Elena Martinez, service number." Sarah provided all the requested information, watching as Rivera cross-referenced everything against military databases in real time. The technology had advanced significantly since her active duty days, making verification both easier and more thorough. "According to our preliminary records, you did serve in the Navy from 2008 to 2020, Rivera confirmed. However, there seems to be some discrepancy regarding your assignment to Special Operations units. Can you walk us through your career progression?" Sarah took a deep breath and began recounting her military journey once again. She described her initial enlistment, her decision to pursue SEAL training, and the grueling selection process that had tested every aspect of her physical and mental capabilities. With each detail, she could see Rivera making notes and occasionally checking information against her tablet. "You mentioned BUD/S Class 234, Peterson interjected. "Can you tell us about your specific role during Hell Week?" The question was clearly designed to trip her up, to catch her in an inconsistency that would reveal her deception. But Sarah had lived through Hell Week, and the memories were burned into her consciousness with painful clarity. "I was assigned to Boat Crew 7, she replied without hesitation. "Our crew leader was a guy named Thompson from Missouri, and we had the slowest boat times for the first 3 days. Instructor Chief Martinez, no relation, despite the name, made us do extra surf torture because he said we were embarrassing the other crews." She continued describing specific incidents from that week, details that could not be found in any book or online forum. The taste of salt water mixed with sand, the feeling of hypothermia setting in during night exercises, the moment when several teammates collapsed from exhaustion and had to be carried to medical. "On day 4, Thompson got rolled back for a stress fracture in his foot," Sarah continued. "That left our boat crew without a leader, and Chief Martinez asked who wanted to step up. Everyone looked at me because I had been carrying more than my share of the weight, literally and figuratively." Rivera was listening intently now, her professional skepticism beginning to soften as Sarah's account grew more detailed and personal. The emotions that crossed Sarah's face as she recalled these memories were genuine, the kind that could not be faked or rehearsed. Leading that boat crew for the rest of Hell Week was one of the hardest things I'd ever done, Sarah admitted. Not because of the physical challenges, but because I knew that every mistake would be attributed to my gender rather than my experience level. I felt like I was representing every woman who might want to follow this path. Peterson was checking Sarah's account against historical records, cross-referencing names and dates with official documentation. Bud/S Class 234 did have unusual circumstances during Hell Week, he confirmed. Weather conditions forced several modifications to the standard schedule. Right, Sarah nodded. We had that freak storm on day 5 that flooded the compound. They moved us to indoor training for 12 hours while the base dealt with drainage issues. Some of the candidates thought we'd get a break, but the instructors just found new ways to make us miserable inside. The level of detail was convincing both MPs that they were dealing with someone who had genuine first-hand experience. But Rivera still had more questions, probing deeper into Sarah's post-training assignments and operational history. After completing BUD/S, where were you assigned? Rivera asked. SEAL Team 5, based out of Coronado, Sarah replied. My first platoon chief was Senior Chief Rodriguez, and my LPO was Petty Officer First Class Williams. We spent 6 months in advanced training before my first deployment. What kind of advanced training? Sarah described the seemingly endless cycle of preparation that followed basic SEAL training. Close quarters combat drills, advanced weapons training, language courses, cultural familiarization, and specialized skills that would be needed for their specific deployment area. Each day brought new challenges designed to mold recent BUD/S graduates into effective operators. The language training was particularly challenging for me, Sarah admitted. I had studied Spanish in high school, but Pashto and Arabic were completely different. I spent extra hours with the linguist instructors, knowing that communication failures could get people killed downrange. Rivera made another note and consulted her tablet. Your first deployment was to Afghanistan in 2010. What was your primary mission set? This was where Sarah's story would either be confirmed or fall apart. Operational details from Afghanistan were still classified in many cases, but there would be official records that could be verified or contradicted by her account. Counterterrorism operations primarily, Sarah said carefully. We conducted direct action raids against Taliban leadership, gathered intelligence on supply routes, and worked with Afghan special forces to build their capabilities. She described the deployment without revealing classified information, painting a picture of the challenging environment and complex mission requirements that define military operations in Afghanistan. Rivera and Peterson both had deployment experience themselves, and they recognized the authenticity in Sarah's descriptions. Can you tell us about any specific incidents that resulted in combat decorations? Peterson asked. Sarah was quiet for a moment, gathering herself to discuss memories that still caused her pain. The decorations represented moments of triumph, but they were also reminders of friends lost and prices paid for those victories. My first Bronze Star came from a mission in Helmand Province, she began slowly. We had intelligence on a Taliban commander who was coordinating attacks against coalition convoys. The compound was heavily defended, and our assault team took immediate contact when we breached the perimeter. She described the firefight in clinical terms, focusing on tactical details rather than the emotional weight of the experience. 2 of her teammates had been wounded in the initial assault, and Sarah had exposed herself to enemy fire to provide medical aid while maintaining suppressive fire against Taliban positions. The citation mentioned my actions under fire, she concluded. But, honestly, anyone in that position would have done the same thing. We don't leave teammates behind. Rivera was clearly moved by the account, but she maintained her professional demeanor. What about your Purple Heart? Can you tell us about the incident that led to that decoration? This was even more difficult territory for Sarah. The Purple Heart represented not just her own sacrifice, but the loss of a close friend and teammate who had not made it home from that deployment. IED strike during a patrol in Kandahar province, Sarah said quietly. We were returning from a successful mission when our vehicle hit a pressure plate explosive. The blast killed our driver instantly and wounded 3 others, including me. She touched her left shoulder unconsciously, where shrapnel scars were hidden beneath her shirt. The physical wounds had healed, but the psychological impact of losing a teammate in such a sudden, violent way had taken much longer to process. Petty Officer Jenkins was driving, Sarah continued, her voice taking on a more subdued tone. He was 22 years old, from Ohio, and he was going to propose to his girlfriend when we got back from deployment. The blast killed him before any of us could react. The MPs exchanged glances, recognizing the genuine grief in Sarah's voice. This was not someone recounting a story they had read or heard secondhand. These were personal memories, painful and real, that spoke to the authenticity of her service. "I'm sorry for your loss," Rivera said quietly, momentarily stepping away from her official role. "Losing teammates is something that stays with you." Sarah nodded, appreciating the moment of human connection in what had become a formal interrogation. "Jenkins was a good man and a good SEAL. He deserved better than dying on some random road in Afghanistan." Peterson was continuing to verify details against official records, and his expression suggested that everything was checking out. "Ma'am, your service record appears to be completely legitimate. All the details you've provided match official documentation." But Rivera was not ready to close the case yet. The complaint had been filed by a veteran with his own distinguished service record, and there was pressure from VA leadership to thoroughly investigate any stolen valor allegations. "Ms. Martinez, I need to ask you about something specific," Rivera said, consulting her notes. "The gentleman who filed the complaint mentioned that you don't have any visible signs of military service. No tattoos, no scars, nothing that would immediately identify you as special operations." Sarah understood where this was heading. The expectation that military service, particularly special operations, should be worn like a badge of honor, visible to anyone who knew what to look for. It was a stereotype that had been reinforced by movies and media, but did not reflect the reality of how many veterans chose to present themselves in civilian life. "Not all of us choose to advertise our service," Sarah replied diplomatically. "Some people get military tattoos, some people don't. Some people like to talk about their deployments, others prefer to keep that part of their lives private." "But surely you have some kind of identifying marks?" Peterson pressed. "Scars from training or combat? Something that would prove you've been through what you say you have?" Sarah hesitated, knowing that this request was venturing into uncomfortable territory. The scars she carried from military service were mostly hidden, both physical and psychological. She had made a conscious choice to blend into civilian life rather than wearing her military experience as an identifier. "I have scars," she admitted. "But they're not in places I'm comfortable showing to strangers." The MPs seemed to understand her reluctance, but their investigation required them to verify every aspect of her claimed service. Rivera looked uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking, but she had a job to do. "Ma'am, I understand your privacy concerns, but we need some kind of physical verification to complete our investigation," Rivera explained. "Is there anything you can show us that would confirm your military service?" Sarah considered her options. She could refuse to provide any physical evidence and hope that the documentary proof would be sufficient. She could contact her former commanding officers and wait for them to provide verification, which could take days or weeks. Or she could reveal something that she had kept private for years, something that few people outside her immediate family even knew existed. "There is something," she said finally, "but I need you to understand that this is very personal, and I don't usually share it with people." Rivera nodded encouragingly. "Whatever you're comfortable sharing. We're just trying to complete our investigation so we can resolve this matter." Sarah took a deep breath and slowly rolled up the left sleeve of her shirt, revealing her upper arm for the first time since arriving at the VA office. Both MPs leaned forward to get a better look at what she was showing them. There, on the inside of her upper arm, was a tattoo that neither of them had expected to see. It was not large or elaborate, just a simple design in black ink that would be completely invisible unless someone was specifically looking for it. But, for those who knew what to look for, it was unmistakable proof of something that could not be faked. Peterson whistled softly under his breath. "Is that what I think it is?" Rivera was staring at the tattoo with obvious recognition and something approaching awe. "Ma'am, how long have you had that tattoo?" "I got it after my first deployment," Sarah replied, rolling her sleeve back down. "It's not something I show people casually." The atmosphere in the room had changed completely. Both MPs were looking at Sarah with new respect, their professional skepticism replaced by the recognition that they were in the presence of someone who had truly earned the right to wear that SEAL shirt. "Ma'am, I think we have all the verification we need," Rivera said, closing her tablet. "I'm going to recommend that this investigation be closed with no further action." But, even as she spoke, they could hear raised voices coming from the waiting room outside. The veteran who had initiated the complaint was apparently unsatisfied with how long the investigation was taking, and his demands for action were growing louder and more insistent. The commotion in the waiting room was growing louder by the minute. Through the office door, Sarah could hear the original complainant rallying other veterans to his cause, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard and respected. His arguments were persuasive to those who shared his preconceptions about what a Navy SEAL should look like. 30 minutes they've had her back there, his voice boomed across the waiting area. How long does it take to verify fake documents? This is exactly what's wrong with our system, too politically correct to call out obvious fraud. Staff Sergeant Rivera exchanged a concerned glance with Corporal Peterson. While they had satisfied themselves that Sarah's service was legitimate, they still had to deal with the volatile situation developing outside their temporary interview room. The last thing anyone wanted was a confrontation that could escalate beyond their ability to control. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to wait here for a few more minutes," Rivera told Sarah. "I want to address the situation in the waiting room before we conclude this investigation officially." Sarah nodded, understanding the delicate position the MPs found themselves in. They had done their job thoroughly and professionally, but now they had to manage the political and social dynamics of a veterans' facility where emotions ran high and military pride was paramount. As the MPs left to speak with the complainant, Sarah sat alone in the small office, processing everything that had happened over the past few hours. She thought about the tattoo she had just revealed, something she had kept private for over a decade since getting it shortly after returning from her first deployment to Afghanistan. The tattoo was small and simple, but its significance was profound to anyone familiar with special operations culture. It depicted a trident intertwined with a single black rose, with numbers underneath that corresponded to the date of her first combat mission. The rose represented fallen comrades, a tradition among some SEAL teams for honoring teammates who did not make it home. The specific design and placement were known only to those who had earned the right to wear them. More importantly, the tattoo had been applied by a specific artist who worked exclusively with special operations personnel, someone whose work was recognized by insiders but unknown to the general public. The technique, style, and subtle details were impossible to replicate without access to the tight-knit community of special operations veterans. Sarah could hear Rivera's professional voice cutting through the heated discussion outside, attempting to calm tensions while maintaining her authority as the investigating officer. The complainant was not backing down easily, his decades of military experience giving him confidence that his assessment was correct regardless of what any investigation might conclude. "I don't care what paperwork she has," the man was saying loudly enough for Sarah to hear clearly. "I can spot a fake from across the room, and that little girl is not a Navy SEAL. Real SEALs have presence, they carry themselves differently. She looks like she's never been in a fight in her life." Peterson's younger voice responded with diplomatic firmness. "Sir, we appreciate your concern for maintaining military honors, but our investigation has been thorough. We need to ask everyone to remain calm while we conclude our business here." "Thorough?" The complainant's voice rose another notch. "How thorough can it be when you've got a fake sitting right there in front of you? This is about respect for the men who earned that trident, who bled and died for it. We can't just hand it out to anyone who shows up with a costume." Sarah felt her hands clench involuntarily at the word costume. Her SEAL Foundation shirt represented more than just clothing, it symbolized the most challenging and meaningful period of her life. Every thread connected her to memories of teammates who had become family, missions that had tested her limits, and sacrifices that civilians could never fully understand. The door opened, and Johnson, the original security officer, stepped inside looking frazzled and apologetic. "Ma'am, I'm really sorry about all this. The situation out there is getting pretty heated, and my supervisor is asking for updates every few minutes." "What exactly is happening?" Sarah asked. "Well, the gentleman who made the complaint has convinced several other veterans that this is some kind of test case for stolen valor enforcement," Johnson explained. "They're saying that if we don't take strong action here, it will send a message that anyone can impersonate special operations personnel without consequences." Sarah understood the broader implications of her situation now. She was not just defending her own reputation, she had become an unwitting symbol in a larger cultural battle about military authenticity, gender roles, and the changing face of American armed forces. "They're also saying," Johnson continued hesitantly, "that the MPs are being too lenient because you're a woman, and that political correctness is preventing them from doing their job properly." The accusation stung because it touched on Sarah's deepest fears about how her service was perceived. Throughout her military career, she had worked twice as hard as her male counterparts to prove that her presence was not the result of lowered standards or social engineering. Now, even her vindication was being questioned on the same grounds. Rivera returned to the office with Peterson close behind, both looking like they had spent the last 20 minutes trying to defuse a powder keg. Their professional composure was intact, but Sarah could see the stress in their postures and expressions. "Ms. Martinez, we have a situation," Rivera began diplomatically. "Our investigation clearly supports your claims about military service. Your documentation is authentic, your knowledge is detailed and accurate, and you've provided physical evidence that corroborates your special operations background." "But?" Sarah prompted, sensing that there was more to come. "But the complaint was filed publicly, in front of numerous witnesses, and there's now significant pressure to resolve this in a way that satisfies everyone involved," Peterson explained. "The complainant is insisting that we're not being thorough enough, and he's got support from other veterans who share his concerns." Sarah felt a sinking sensation in her stomach. "What are you suggesting?" Rivera looked uncomfortable with what she was about to propose. "There's a possibility of bringing in additional verification. Someone with the authority and knowledge to definitively confirm or deny your special operations service in a way that would satisfy all parties involved." "Who did you have in mind?" Sarah asked, though she was not sure she wanted to hear the answer. "We've been in contact with Naval Special Warfare Command," Rivera explained. "They're sending a representative who can provide authoritative verification of your service record and special operations credentials." Sarah felt her heart rate increase. While she was confident in the legitimacy of her service, the prospect of having her entire military career scrutinized by current special operations leadership was intimidating. These were people who knew the community intimately, who could detect inconsistencies or discrepancies that might escape other investigators. "How long will that take?" she asked. "They said someone could be here within the hour," Peterson replied. "It's unusual for them to respond so quickly, but, apparently, stolen valor cases involving special operations are high priority." The waiting began again, but this time with different stakes. Sarah was no longer just defending herself against the accusations of a skeptical veteran, she was about to be evaluated by the current leadership of the community she had served with distinction for over a decade. As the minutes ticked by, Sarah reflected on the irony of her situation. She had survived combat deployments, rigorous training, and the constant pressure of proving herself in a male-dominated field. Now, she was facing perhaps her greatest challenge in a sterile VA office, defending her right to wear a simple t-shirt that represented the proudest achievement of her life. The waiting room had quieted somewhat, but she could still hear occasional murmurs and discussions about her case. Some voices expressed doubt about her claims, while others seemed more sympathetic to her position. The veteran community was clearly divided on how to handle the situation. Johnson appeared in the doorway again, this time with a different expression on his face. "Ma'am, there's been a development. The representative from Naval Special Warfare Command has arrived, and they're asking to speak with you immediately." Sarah stood up, straightening her shirt and checking her appearance one final time. Whatever happened in the next few minutes would determine not just the outcome of this investigation, but potentially her standing in the veteran community and her ability to maintain the dignity she had earned through years of service. "Before we go out there," Rivera said quietly, "I want you to know that Corporal Peterson and I are both convinced of your authenticity. Whatever happens next, you should know that you conducted yourself with professionalism and honor throughout this investigation." Sarah appreciated the support, but she knew that the final judgment would come from someone whose opinion carried far more weight in the special operations community. As they walked toward the door, she could hear the waiting room fall silent in anticipation of what was about to unfold. The walk from the office to the main waiting area felt longer than any patrol she had conducted in Afghanistan. Each step carried the weight of her military legacy, the respect of her peers, and the validation of sacrifices she had made for her country. The eyes of dozens of veterans followed her movement, some sympathetic, others skeptical, all waiting to see how this unprecedented situation would resolve itself. Standing near the security desk was a figure in navy dress blues, his posture and bearing immediately marking him as senior military leadership. Even from across the room, Sarah could see the gleam of multiple ribbons on his chest and the distinctive insignia that identified his rank and position within the naval hierarchy. As they approached, Sarah realized with growing apprehension that she was about to face the most important test of credibility in her entire military career. Everything she had worked for, everything she had sacrificed, and everything she had earned was about to be evaluated by someone whose judgment would be final and absolute. The Admiral, for she could now see the stars on his collar, turned as they approached, his weathered face reflecting decades of military service and the authority that came with leading some of America's most elite fighting forces. His eyes met hers with the penetrating gaze of someone accustomed to making instant assessments of character and capability. "Ms. Martinez," he said in a voice that carried across the now silent waiting room, "I understand there's been some question about your service record." Sarah came to attention instinctively, her military bearing returning automatically in the presence of senior leadership. "Yes, sir. I've been accused of stolen valor for wearing my SEAL Foundation shirt." The Admiral studied her for a moment, his expression revealing nothing about his thoughts or conclusions. Around them, the entire VA facility seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the resolution of a confrontation that had taken on significance far beyond its humble beginnings. Admiral James Mitchell had served in the Navy for 38 years, the last 12 as the commanding officer of Naval Special Warfare Command. He had seen the special operations community evolve through multiple conflicts, technological advances, and social changes that would have been unimaginable when he first entered the service. His weathered hands bore the scars of combat deployments, and his chest displayed ribbons that told the story of a distinguished career in some of the most challenging environments on Earth. When the call came to his office about a potential stolen valor case involving a female SEAL, Mitchell had initially planned to send a subordinate to handle the investigation. These cases were unfortunately common, and, while they required thorough investigation, they rarely demanded the personal attention of a flag officer. However, something about this particular case had caught his interest enough to drive the 40 minutes to the San Diego VA facility himself. Perhaps it was the detailed nature of the accused person's knowledge, which had been relayed to him during the initial phone call. Perhaps it was the passionate insistence of the complainant that this was a clear-cut case of fraud that needed immediate action. Or perhaps it was simply his growing concern about the way female service members were being received in the veteran community as more women entered previously male-dominated fields. Standing in the VA waiting room, surrounded by dozens of veterans watching his every move, Admiral Mitchell understood that his handling of this situation would send a message far beyond the immediate participants. The special operations community was small and tight-knit, but it was also evolving to include personnel who did not fit traditional stereotypes. He looked at Sarah Martinez, taking in her appearance with the practiced eye of someone who had evaluated thousands of military personnel over the decades. She stood at attention with the automatic bearing of someone whose military training had become second nature, but her civilian clothes and unassuming presence would not immediately mark her as special operations to a casual observer. "At ease," Admiral Mitchell said, his voice carrying the authority that came from years of command. "I've reviewed the initial reports from the military police investigation, and I understand you've provided substantial documentation of your service record." "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, relaxing slightly but maintaining her respectful posture. "I served with SEAL Team 5 from 2010 to 2020, with deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq." The Admiral nodded, consulting a folder that had been prepared for him during the drive to the facility. "According to the records I've seen, you completed BUD/S training in Class 234 and served with distinction during multiple deployments. Your decorations include 3 Bronze Stars and a Purple Heart." A murmur ran through the waiting room as the Admiral's words confirmed what Sarah had been claiming all along. Several veterans who had been skeptical of her story now looked uncertain, while others maintained their suspicion despite the official validation. The original complainant stepped forward, his Vietnam veteran's cap slightly askew and his voice carrying the frustration of someone whose certainty was being challenged by authority. "Sir, with all due respect, I've been around military personnel for most of my adult life. I know what a warrior looks like, and she ain't it." Admiral Mitchell turned his attention to the older veteran, his expression remaining diplomatically neutral despite the obvious disrespect in the man's tone. "What's your name and service record, sir?" "Master Sergeant William Thompson, United States Army, retired. Served 3 tours in Vietnam, 2 in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. 30 years active duty, 10 years with military contractors overseas." Thompson's chest swelled with pride as he recited his impressive service record. "Thank you for your service, Master Sergeant," Admiral Mitchell replied with genuine respect. "Your record speaks for itself, and your concern for protecting military honors is commendable. However, I need you to understand that the special operations community has changed significantly since your active duty days." Thompson's face flushed with anger at what he perceived as a dismissal of his experience. Changed or not, sir, real warriors have a certain bearing about them. They carry themselves differently. This woman looks like she's never seen combat, never been through the kind of training that makes someone a SEAL. The Admiral studied Thompson for a moment, recognizing the type of veteran who struggled to adapt to the evolving nature of military service. These men had earned their stripes in a different era, when the armed forces were more homogeneous and traditional gender roles were rarely questioned. Master Sergeant, you're absolutely right that special operations personnel often have distinctive characteristics, Admiral Mitchell acknowledged. However, those characteristics are not always visible to outside observers. Some of our most effective operators deliberately cultivate the ability to blend into civilian environments without detection. He turned back to Sarah, his expression shifting to one of professional assessment. Ms. Martinez, I'd like you to tell me about your most challenging mission during your deployment to Afghanistan. Sarah took a deep breath, understanding that this was the moment when her entire military legacy would be validated or destroyed by someone whose opinion carried absolute authority in her community. She chose her words carefully, balancing the need to demonstrate her experience with the ongoing requirements for operational security. Sir, during my second deployment, we received intelligence about a Taliban commander who was coordinating complex attacks against coalition forces in Helmand province, she began. The target was located in a compound that had been used as a weapons cache, with multiple buildings and extensive underground tunnel networks. Admiral Mitchell listened intently as Sarah described the mission planning process, the intelligence gathering that preceded the operation, and the tactical challenges presented by the target location. Her knowledge was detailed and specific, reflecting genuine understanding of special operations procedures and capabilities. The insertion was conducted by helicopter during a new moon phase to minimize detection, Sarah continued. We fast-roped into a landing zone approximately 2 kilometers from the target compound and moved on foot through terrain that provided minimal cover. As she spoke, Sarah unconsciously fell into the clinical language of after-action reports, describing movements, timelines, and decision points with the precision that had been drilled into her during years of training and operational experience. The Admiral recognized the authenticity in her account, the kind of detailed knowledge that could not be acquired through research or imagination. Upon reaching the target building, we encountered heavier resistance than anticipated, Sarah said, her voice taking on a more subdued tone as she recalled memories that still haunted her. The Taliban had reinforced their positions since our last intelligence update, and they were prepared for our arrival. The waiting room had become completely silent, with every person straining to hear Sarah's account of combat operations that few would ever experience firsthand. Even Thompson, despite his skepticism, was listening with the attention of someone who understood the gravity of what was being described. My team leader was wounded during the initial breach, Sarah continued. Shrapnel from an improvised explosive device that had been rigged to the main door. With him down, I had to take charge of the assault team while continuing to treat his injuries under fire. Admiral Mitchell was taking mental notes as Sarah spoke, evaluating not just the content of her story but the way she told it. The emotional weight in her voice when discussing wounded teammates, the technical precision in describing tactical procedures, and the leadership challenges she had faced all pointed to genuine operational experience. The mission was ultimately successful, Sarah concluded. We eliminated the target and secured valuable intelligence materials. But it came at a cost. My team leader spent 6 months recovering from his wounds, and the experience taught me that combat leadership often means making life or death decisions with incomplete information. The Admiral nodded slowly, his expression revealing nothing about his assessment of Sarah's account. Around them, the waiting room remained silent, with dozens of veterans waiting to see how this unprecedented situation would be resolved. Ms. Martinez, would you mind showing me your left arm? Admiral Mitchell asked quietly. The request surprised everyone in the room, including Sarah herself. She looked at the Admiral with confusion, uncertain about what he was hoping to see or why he would make such a specific request. Sir, she questioned, seeking clarification. Your left arm, Admiral Mitchell repeated gently. Specifically, the inside of your upper arm. Sarah felt her heart rate increase as she realized what the Admiral was asking for. Somehow, he knew about the tattoo that she had shown to the MPs earlier, the discreet marking that few people outside the special operations community would recognize or understand. With trembling hands, Sarah slowly rolled up the sleeve of her shirt, revealing the small but significant tattoo on the inside of her left arm. The trident and black rose design was clearly visible, along with the numbers that marked the date of her first combat mission. Admiral Mitchell leaned forward to examine the tattoo more closely, his weathered face breaking into the first smile he had shown since arriving at the VA facility. When he straightened up, his expression had completely changed, reflecting recognition and something approaching reverence. "Petty Officer Martinez," he said softly, using her former rank for the first time, "that tattoo checks out." The words hung in the air for a moment before their full significance became clear to everyone present. Admiral Mitchell's voice carried absolute authority, and his recognition of the tattoo's authenticity represented final validation of Sarah's service that no one could dispute. "Ladies and gentlemen," Admiral Mitchell announced, turning to address the entire waiting room, "you are in the presence of a genuine American hero." Petty Officer Martinez served with distinction in some of the most dangerous operations conducted by naval special warfare. Her record of service is exemplary, and her sacrifices for this nation are beyond question. The transformation in the waiting room was immediate and profound. Veterans who had been skeptical of Sarah's claims now looked at her with newfound respect, while those who had supported her felt vindicated in their judgment. The original complainant, Master Sergeant Thompson, stood with his mouth slightly open, struggling to process the complete reversal of his assumptions. "But, sir," Thompson stammered, "she doesn't look like what you expected a SEAL to look like?" Admiral Mitchell interrupted, his tone becoming more firm. "Master Sergeant, that woman has probably seen more combat than half the people in this room. She's earned the right to wear that shirt through blood, sweat, and sacrifice that most of us can only imagine." Sarah felt tears beginning to form in her eyes, not from sadness but from relief and gratitude. For the first time since this ordeal began, she felt truly vindicated, not just legally but emotionally and socially within the veteran community that meant so much to her. Admiral Mitchell turned back to Sarah, his expression softening to one of paternal pride. "Petty Officer, I owe you an apology on behalf of the veteran community. What happened here today should never have occurred, and I want you to know that your service and your sacrifices are recognized and honored by everyone who truly understands what it means to serve in special operations." "Thank you, sir," Sarah managed to say, her voice thick with emotion. "Furthermore," the Admiral continued, "I want you to know that if you ever need anything, employment assistance, benefits support, or just someone to vouch for your character, you have my personal contact information and my complete endorsement." Master Sergeant Thompson approached slowly, his earlier aggression replaced by obvious embarrassment and regret. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I owe you a sincere apology. I was wrong, and I let my preconceptions cloud my judgment. You've earned my respect, and I'm honored to share this space with you." Sarah accepted his apology graciously, understanding that his initial reaction came from a place of protective instinct rather than malicious intent. "No hard feelings, Master Sergeant. We all want to protect what we've earned." As the crowd in the waiting room began to disperse, several veterans approached Sarah to shake her hand and thank her for her service. The atmosphere had completely changed from confrontational to celebratory, with Sarah finally receiving the recognition and respect that her military record deserved. Admiral Mitchell spent a few more minutes speaking with Sarah privately, discussing her transition to civilian life and offering resources that might help with her ongoing challenges as a veteran. Before leaving, he made one final announcement to everyone remaining in the facility. "I want everyone here to remember what happened today," he said, his voice carrying the weight of decades of military leadership. "Service to our nation comes in many forms, and heroes don't always look the way we expect them to. The measure of a warrior is not their appearance, but their courage, their competence, and their commitment to something greater than themselves." As Admiral Mitchell departed, Sarah sat back down in the waiting room, finally, able to keep her original appointment at the VA. The ordeal was over, but its impact would stay with her forever. She had been forced to defend her service and her honor in the most public way possible, but she had also experienced the profound vindication of having her sacrifices recognized by the highest levels of military leadership. The shirt she wore, the simple Black Seal Foundation t-shirt that had started this entire confrontation, felt different now. It was no longer just a piece of clothing or a symbol of past achievement. It had become a testament to the ongoing struggle for recognition and respect faced by all veterans, but particularly those who did not fit traditional stereotypes of military service. As Sarah waited for her name to be called for her benefits appointment, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a small town in New Mexico to the elite ranks of Navy SEALs, from the mountains of Afghanistan to a VA waiting room in San Diego, she had consistently proved that determination and character were more important than appearance or preconceptions. The tattoo on her arm, now known to many more people than she had ever intended, would always remind her of teammates who had not made it home and missions that had tested every aspect of her being. But it would also serve as a permanent reminder of this day, when her right to honor their memory and claim her place in the warrior community had been challenged and ultimately vindicated by the highest authority possible. Sarah Martinez was a Navy SEAL, and no one would ever question that again.